right. Good morning. Welcome to the Word and Journey podcast, where we read stories and other books that shape us and make us think and give us good ideas for life and death and the afterlife, as in the case of the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. So here we are, Moses and Jake, once again. This takes me back to the days of the Great Divorce, which was great, which is not indicative of our relationship. That's actually another book title. So how you doing, Jake?
I'm doing all right. It's been kind of a crazy, I don't know, like month since we've done this, but good and plugging away. Got to do a lot of travel, got to see some really fun concerts. So yeah.
A good concert's a really good thing. What's one of the best concerts you've ever seen?
Oh, that's tough. I've actually only recently started really going to concerts over the last few years. I think my favorite, if it wasn't this one, so this one was Fall Out Boy and Jimmy Eat World, which was just massive. It was over in the Climate Pledge Arena, so huge arena in Seattle. Would probably be Lindsey Sterling out here in Spokane. She came to one of the casinos to play. That's also just got this amazing outdoor venue. It was a little bit rainy, which was kind of sad, but like not terribly so. And the crowd was just having so much fun. And Lindsey was amazing, and the other band, Walk Off the Earth, was so much fun. And Lindsey, I think at just about every one of her shows, typically brings up like a youth to play through part of the song, like live, and it's just wild. So
fun. That I have appreciated her music for a long time. I have never seen her live, but that's something
worth it if you're available to.
So delightful. Yeah. I don't go to a lot of shows, and maybe it's because I'm old or boring, or I go for movies.
You have 3 kids,
or I have 3 kids. That too. Yeah. Although, even before then, I didn't go to a lot of shows. Although I do remember, I think one of the very first concerts I went to that was like a cool concert and not like one that my parents went to. It was like Third Day, Switchfoot, and All Star United. But like back in the days when like Switchfoot was like the short opening act for like another band.
Oh, okay.
So like they were very new at the time, and I had no idea who anybody was, and I was just like, this is so loud, and why does my dad make me wear earplugs, and it's so loud, and but I'm away from home, so that was nice. So anyway, good times. Cirque du Soleil too. They were we saw their tribute to Michael Jackson a few years back. That was impressive, very impressive on so many levels.
Amazing.
Yes. So the other one I think I would like to see sometime is the Shen Yun dancers, which, okay, now we've, strayed from the realm of concerts into just like shows and performance in general. But yes, the Chinese dancers, I think they're Chinese. Anyway, I see the posters all the time. It looks impressive. So someday.
They have an intriguing history that I will let you look up.
Okay.
But definitely, yeah, they are interesting for sure.
Okay.
But I'm sure live they're amazing.
All right. Well, with that teaser, Moses has his homework, and y'all get to wonder what that is. And now we'll talk about demons. So, okay. So where we left off with it's early in the morning and I haven't had caffeine and I'm live on the radio. That's fun. So so again, we're here at the end of the book. So this is Screwtape. He's a demon mentor and Wormwood, not Wormtongue. different epic. Wormwood.
Did I ever tell you that was somebody's nickname for me in college?
No. What?
Yeah. I was working for the extended campus department, so mostly the online school. Like we did the management for the courses. We didn't actually like write the course or anything.
Yeah.
And anyways, I was very close with our director, and like had convinced him of like a certain couple of ways to do things. And then this other student worker, she was just so awkward. And I don't think she honestly meant anything ill by it. But she's like, oh, you're kind of like worm tongue. Just whispering in his ear. It's
Right.
like, what?
Yeah.
And so now one of my closest friends who I worked with at the time, just constantly, that's still his nickname for me.
That's delightful. That's what the advisors have turned into. That's delightful. So not Grima Wormtongue, the whisperer to Saruman, but Wormwood, the demon who is trying to tempt this poor hapless soul into hell. Not entirely hapless though, I think, as we'll discover. So so the letter, it's a series of letters again that starts off I think just prior to this human's conversion to Christianity, and then the course of the letters now follows the spiritual growth and subsequent trials and tribulations of this person as he embarks on the spiritual life, with Wormtongue hounding him at Wormwood, Wormwood hounding him at every corner and in every way. And here we get to see kind of how the whole thing ends. So there were a couple letters. So I think I will pick up on letter number 28. So it's 28 out of 31. And this is an interesting one. They're all interesting, partly because it's C.S. Lewis and everything he does is interesting. But so how the story has gone is the patient has so war has broken out in England, and presumably it's one of the world wars of which we're familiar, and it was C.S. Lewis's immediate context, so of course he would write about that. That makes a lot of sense. And so Wormwood is trying to use this, and I think this is the one, letter 28, where Screwtape especially does not want the patient to die, because kind of where the patient, where the human is at a point of some spiritual health, some spiritual growth, and discovering that in adversity, in suffering, there is often a crispness and a clarity to one's spiritual sense. Harkening back to various times in history where Christians have been persecuted, there has tended to be a vibrancy accompanying that. And we can even note, early on in the first few centuries, the early church fell under persecution by the Romans. It was famously very, very brutal. And then following some changes, some brought about by St. Constantine, the external persecutions went away. And that was one of the reasons why we saw a rise in the monastic disciplines, is because people recognize, hey, our faith does better when it's harder or when it's under fire. And so if it's not going to come under fire externally, so then we will challenge ourselves on our own through ascetic disciplines, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a long history in Christianity of like embracing the struggle and embracing the trials and the pains. War can definitely be a great context for that. And so Screwtape is saying, hey, don't let him die during the war, because he'll probably be like automatically sainted or something. And he wants the patient to live, to grow old and prosperous and dull and bored and flounder. And there's it's a little bit of a longer quote, but it really captures it. So I'm going to read it. Screwtape writing to Wormwood. But if only he, the patient, can be kept alive, you have time itself for your ally. The long, dull, monotonous years of middle-aged prosperity or middle-aged adversity are excellent campaigning weather. You see, it is so hard for these creatures to persevere. The routine of adversity, the gradual decay of youthful loves and youthful hopes, the quiet despair, hardly felt as pain, of ever overcoming the chronic temptations with which we have again and again defeated them, the drabness which we create in their lives, and the inarticulate resentment with which we teach them to respond to it, all this provides admirable opportunities of wearing out a soul by attrition. If, on the other hand, the middle years prove prosperous, our position is even stronger. Prosperity knits a man to the world. He feels that he is finding his place in it, while really it is finding its place in him. His increasing reputation, his widening circle of acquaintances, his sense of importance, the growing pressure of absorbing an agreeable work build up in him a sense of being really at home on earth, which is just what we want. You will notice that the young are generally less unwilling to die than the middle-aged and the old. Here, I'm interpreting this as not quite like death by a thousand paper cuts, but like uh, death by prosperity. You get comfortable enough, you don't push yourself, and yeah, there seems to be this threat then of the patient living this long, dull, monotonous life and getting bored and just like forgetting about things that are important. Also, there's a way that prosperity itself can make this world as it is feel like all that there is, or feel like home, or feel like the ultimate end, which would distract one from the kingdom of heaven. So that just seems like it has like a whole bunch of implications for like how we approach wealth and comfort and struggle and suffering. And it seems like one could potentially like really reshape the Christian life based on this idea of like we're safer when we're struggling, or spiritually safer when we're having a little bit of a difficult time of it, or a lot of a difficult time. So I don't know. I found this one really, really interesting. What are what are your thoughts, impressions on this one, Jake?
Yeah, for sure. Like, the complacency versus, and not complacency. I guess maybe that's kind of what Lewis
Well, I
is
guess like
getting at.
complacency. Yeah, that's the word.
Complacency versus, active striving, I guess, within faith. I I think so. Like, I think just broadening the scope of the topic briefly to the human experience. Like, I think many things grow much better during strife, during struggle, and so I think it definitely flows through a lot of this. I am like cultural context between there and now today. It's definitely interesting at the lens, because we often, like, at least in. So, can you hear that cat
A little bit.
scrolling around? Okay, I'm going to try and shove him out the door really fast.
Okay.
He's
Okay.
distracting me.
That's fair. Yeah. Cats can be a little bit distracting. That is what they do. Although, as speaking of another fun C.S. Lewis reference, I think it's Professor Diggory in one of the Chronicles of Narnia, when the children come in to ask him about the wardrobe, and they're like, "Oh, we're so sorry we've distracted you." And he's like, "Oh, children, if there were not distraction," I don't remember exactly what he says, but it's basically like, we need distractions to make life worth living. And so thus cats actually perform us a great spiritual service by distracting us from our dreary life and everything. So anyway, do hug
Uh,
your feline for me
he's
later.
Oh yes, I will. I will. He's a delight. He's a wonder, and he's a small terrorist. And of
Yeah.
course, like, he was super like cuddly this morning, and I got out
Yeah.
of bed, and then he's just wired. So,
Yeah. My cat's really cuddly at night, but then he like leaves during most of the day. So we don't see him very much. He's like a
uh,
teenager.
oh yeah, that's how the other one is. Like, I barely see her, especially now, because she doesn't particularly like the younger one, and so she
Oh,
hides in the basement a lot more. Um, so it's
okay.
fine. But yeah, talking about like strife and persecution, I think one of the more important things that, not important things, but kind of as we kind of shift, and you dropped on this a little bit during the Constantine era and etc., is like, what do we do? Like, what do we do when there are not necessarily times of persecution or whatever to grow the faith? And I think one of the things that is very easy to fall into is narratives of false persecution. Like, you disagree with me, and so it's an attack on me, where like there's that loss of humility. And so, like, remembering to grow and fight for growth in that time of times of peace, right? I think it is, we do ourselves a great disservice to not look for those times of growth during peace, because I think that's honestly some of the harder growth. I think we see that kind of a little bit within Lewis's writing here, because those are the times that we are more easily kind of attacked, if you will, to borrow a lot of his parlance from the book. Like this is the way that the enemy works, and so it makes sense that there's also chance and opportunity for growth within this space.
I think so. It seems like an interesting balance though, because
Mhm.
like on the one hand, there's a thriving we achieve when we're under fire, when things are difficult. But at the same time, I think it is a big if I understand the church teaching right, which I may not, seeking the inner stillness or the inner peace is a big part of the spiritual growth. Or um, there's there's another Thaddeus quote, which I don't recall off the top of my head. Friend of the show, Shay, correct me, but it's something like it's like finding peace is easy, like out in the monastery or out in the wilderness where it's quiet, but like maintaining that peace, like in the world, in the daily life, is a really difficult thing. But it's a value thing to seek the inner peace,
Mhm.
even in the face of things that are really difficult. So, there's another. Now I'm wishing I did my homework a little bit more. I believe that there is a Father Seraphim Rose quote, something along the lines of, in our day and era, we Christians, we don't experience like the kind of persecutions that they have in times past, where people are like, hunting us down and shooting us, or like physically torturing us. But I believe at one point he talks about like the psychological sufferings as being like kind of unique to our time, or sort of like that's maybe for us in our era, like the primary way that we'll struggle and suffer is psychologically, um, which I know, given media culture and political culture and like
Mhm.
everything, they kind of make sense. I mean, it's kind of easy-ish in today's age to like not go hungry or not go cold or anything, kind of, not really, uh, but there's just like this constant assault on the mind,
Mhm.
from all sources. And someone should fish up the actual quote, because I couldn't find it while Jack was talking. But I don't know. I guess what's your thought, like, on like how we
Yeah.
today suffer?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that I don't know if it's truly different or things have been uncovered. Like it's very difficult to try and truly be in the mind of someone 50, 100,000 years ago. And that's always been kind of one thing that I've wondered is like, are we as a race, a community growing um so much, and I use that term very cautiously because it's not to say that we have continued to perfect ourselves or something like that, or that we are so much better than those who have come before us. But um, in aspects, we are for sure, and I wonder if because of those aspects of growth, it has uncovered other things that our ancestors dealt with. I don't know. I would say that like the way the struggles that we have are certainly different. We see this a lot in looking through kind of work culture. Um, Working 40-hour weeks was not a norm, and people kind of have an immediate vision of, let's say, agriculture back, hundreds of years ago. And let me be also very clear, in like non-slave holding contexts, because that's a very different thing. But in sort of like individualistic contexts, you didn't work yourself necessarily to the bone. And there was a lot of work in certain parts of the year, and other parts of the year were rest, and we lost that. We don't have that as a culture, and even during like some of the industrialization sort of stuff, like we have still continued to really outpace ourselves, just kind of like working ourselves, if not physically, mentally to the bone. And not to mention the other stressors. I think for me, one of the things that I've been trying to figure out and focus on, and this comes in waves, and I'm not very good at it, is like you kind of brought up, it's very easy to not go hungry in the world today, and yet people still do. And I think that's where I have been able to refocus some of my angst, and that is working within that context of like, okay, cool, I've got a little bit of time, I've got financial resources, what can I do? What can I do to help that? And again, like I'm not that good at it. Please do not take this as a oh. But I think that's like in these times of peace, I think that is one of the biggest tools. And not like if it's not, working with our houseless population, it's something. There is always like some benefit that you can provide to the people around you. And of course the work will never be done. Like that's the opposite side of the coin to deal with. But in these times of peace, I think that's how we see faith grow. And I think that's fairly well backed up by scripture. Like the Gospels talk a lot about giving everything. And so, yeah, I guess that's,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
hand waving and I'm rambling.
Yeah. That's okay. But you're not yelling at clouds though. So
This is true.
it's true.
Yet.
Yet. And later we'll go hunt for the goats. But I think what you're talking about too, it's the practice of almsgiving in a way. You give of your money, you give of your time, you give of your resources, you give of your extra to invest in others, or you give out of your need. And part of that is really essential, on par with, prayer and fasting, for your own spiritual growth. So it's, yeah, there, it seems it's maybe can happen on a gentle level, but to pray, to fast, to give alms, to do service, those are ways that we challenge ourselves. And so, yeah, like in the absence or in the presence of greater stressors like war and devastation, these other disciplines are still good and still necessary for challenging ourselves to greater growth. So well done. What are your thoughts on letter 29?
Yeah, letter 29 touches on another kind of topic that it's repeated throughout the letters, and that's kind of like this balance that these demons sort of try and strike between virtue and avarice. Even within the first like couple of paragraphs, he's talking about the war again. It's certain that the Germans are going to bomb the patient's town, and that his duties, whatever this patient is doing, is going to keep them in the midst of all of the danger. And the question is, do we aim at cowardice, or do we aim at courage with pride, or at hatred of the Germans? And the following paragraph was kind of funny in a way. He says, "Well, I'm afraid it's no good trying to make him brave. Our research department has not yet discovered, though success is hourly expected, how to provide or produce any virtue. This is a serious handicap. To greatly and effectively wicked, a man needs some virtue." And a lot of this letter ends up going on about how they want to take virtue and kind of twist it. And we see this in prior letters, and we see this all the way through the epilogue. I don't know if we're going to get to that one today, but around like getting people kind of just so close to the good and the ultimate good, and then right there using something like pride or hatred or whatever to really truly twist that virtue. Hatred is manageable, but it's best combined with fear and cowardice, mixing in anticipation to make him frightened. And then it continues on again, like, so these are all like really great avarices. And again, there's this frustration that we see Screwtape has. There's a cruel dilemma before us. If we promoted justice and charity among men, we should be playing directly into the enemy's hands. But if we guide them to the opposite behavior, this sooner or later produces, for he, capital H, permits it to produce, a war or revolution. And the undisguisable issue of cowardice or courage awakes thousands of men from moral stupor. So it seems to be like this really interesting, inevitable drift towards moral clarity and moral progress, I guess you could kind of say, which I think is a really interesting topic, and something that like I've been personally kind of wondering about and doing a little bit of reading on here and there around, like, are we truly better as the human race overall, I guess, across the averages than we were before, and not necessarily looking at any particular time frame, but just like, has there been a trend of progress? I would kind of argue there is, and I think like this goes a little bit more back into kind of where I found myself landing with eschatology. um big fancy word, basically talking about what comes after, what comes next, in especially spiritual matters. And so like there's this definite concept around like our job is to make things continually better and better and better to near perfect for Christ to come back. And there's different views on that, absolutely. Like and so but this kind of reminds me of that kind of line of thought. We do see less violence and less war, like even the atrocities of war that we have today, which are not to be shied away from by any means. We would have, certainly in the West, the 100 Years' War and things like that, where and especially like these kings and kingdoms are flinging lay people, peasants, and whoever else as kind of fodder. And now we have more clarity around that. And it's not to say that that doesn't happen. Still, arguably, it still happens with the United States, depending on perspectives. And so there is still that kind of deep discussions and deep concerns to be had. But at the same time, is like I think this kind of line parallels that thought that I've been having around like there is this inevitable trend towards moral and ethical, I guess, progress. Yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, I hadn't really thought about that before now, but yeah, I'm not sure, because it seems like things do progress and they do change, but I know I'd probably lean more on the side of like, I mean, every era, every culture is challenged in a
Sure.
particular way. Like, maybe maybe these days we're not super challenged, by the idea of like slavery. Like we kind of know, like as a culture, like slavery is bad. Like owning people, objectifying people is bad, even though I mean people still get trafficked. But we kind of look at that pretty clearly as like that's a bad thing. But then when it comes to like how should a husband and wife interact together? How should people have sex? How should people manage their money? Should we, how should we care for the poor? Like, do we care for them, or do we expect them to help themselves? Like, I know I perceive that there's not a lot of clarity on those, or there's just like a lot, there's a lot of different opinions, and we haven't really figured out how to talk across opinion gaps really well. So I don't know. I'll have to think about that.
That was very off the cuff for me, so no
Yeah,
worries.
yeah, no, that's okay. But I think though, like, I mean, thinking here's where, and this maybe like hints a little bit at this epilogue. When Screwtape's proposing a toast, he'll start talking. He goes on this rant about democracy, which I do want to ask you about in a little bit, but he'll land on this idea that like individuals are saved, cultures are not saved, and so
Which is so interesting because like arguably there are pieces of the gospel that counter that.
I think so too. I mean, I think like when we see in the life of the church, it's very communal. So I guess we'll we'll tackle that. But 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 I think what I'm noticing is there's a way where let's say society can be crumbling, like the Roman Empire can be falling and disintegrating, but within there's going to be pockets of people or individuals who are ascending into greater worth, greater value, virtue, holiness. And so so I don't know, maybe one of the main questions to ask is like, well, should we measure progress by how like the state is doing, or how like culture in general is doing, or do we really need to measure it by like, well, how is like this particular local community or this individual within the community? So I'd invite more experienced Orthodox opinions to comment on that, but it's a good thought.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Letter number 30, very quickly, because I want to talk more about 31. So letter 30 is about fatigue, and well, I don't know. I think this one just like resonated with me on this personal level. I'm tired a lot of the time.
Same.
Yeah. And it's not always just like a physical tired. There's just like this like soul worn weariness of like, wow, life is hard. For us who survive into adulthood, our responsibility load tends to increase, and the burdens of that. I mean, they're worthwhile. They're interesting. I think my life is super full and interesting and satisfying in a lot of ways, but it's really tiring. And um, and I think something about this letter really draws out the aspect of the Christian life being this long haul. It's not just this highly emotive decision you make at summer camp. One time when you're 17, it's like very much like, okay, no, this is the life you're going to live, and it's a long thing, and you have to embody these virtues and embrace them and develop them, over time, over years and decades, and there and it's gonna be hard. And there's one of the teachers I really respect, Father Thomas Hopko. He has a maxim for life, something along the lines of, expect nothing out of life except to be sorely tempted every day until the end. Which kind of feels like the idea behind this one. Screwtape's encouraging Wormwood to like make use of the fatigue and like don't let him get rest and just keep him yeah just keep him tired. I think there's this idea of what does he talk about? Like let the trials seem short. Let him think I can handle this trial for a reasonable period, but let it always go on just beyond that. Like it's not even that like the trials, whatever they are, need to go on like forever. They just need to go on beyond what the person thinks is reasonable. And so again, I guess that's where expectation comes in. Like if I'm saying, well, if I'm expecting my baseline to be comfortable and secure and stable, and I'm just always trying to get back there as soon as I can, then yeah, I'm going to be really frustrated and really vulnerable to this, because like no trial will seem like a reasonable thing. But then if I can really truly expect, no, actually, like the struggle is more the normative state. Oh, things are easy right now. That's nice. Okay, struggle will resume on Monday. That might leave me in a safer spot.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you find to be restful for you these days?
What is restful? It's funny because I still like I've been in this years-long process now of realizing that I don't really necessarily know. I don't know how like I recharge my battery. And I think it's been partly a process of like my personality shift and growth over the last, I don't know, 2 decades. Like I grew up very, very introverted. And now I am, at least according to others, one of the most extroverted people they know, which is still wild to me because I certainly don't feel like that. Um, but I find that I need both and something more like both like quiet time alone and time around people, but of a certain type. And I haven't even necessarily narrowed down what that type is, to feel recharged, to feel rested. And so I think right now one of the other things that I'm looking forward to in rest is again re-entering into some church life. We've talked a little bit about my journey around that, but I've been attending more and more um, the local Episcopalian church, and really found rest in a lot of that, and in a lot of my conversations. That and then just trying to remember that I don't need to do all of the things, housework, work, you know, volunteer work, all that sort of stuff, which of course, like naturally I still keep trying to pile on more. I have so many undone house projects, but I'm learning to at least be a little bit gracious with myself with some of the things that, you know what? Yeah, I took yesterday and today off because I needed some rest from work because things have been insane, and I was going to do some of those house things, and then I realized, nope, those aren't happening, and just kind of being okay with that. Um, so I don't know. We'll see. I mean, of course, other life things are happening, and I've promised some other people like that I'll meet with them because I can't stop apparently. So, um, but yeah. How about you? What do you find restful?
Um, like actual legitimate sleep. Honestly,
Yeah.
is becoming a thing where I'm kind of discovering like the early bedtimes a little bit.
Mm,
I I think I was a morning person for the longest time, and then kind of have shifted to be kind of a night person for because logistics. But I miss the mornings, and um, I and I think what I'm finding to be truly restful are the quiet moments. The quiet moments, that involve prayer, that involve journaling, that involve writing, that involve the more gentle body work. I mean, I love a good swim and working out and everything, but or going bouldering. But sometimes just gently stretching my body and then reading a little bit is really restful. And yeah, with people, I mean, I don't think I could ever live as a hermit, but like I have to be really particular with who I connect with because I'm
mm,
discovering like a lot of interactions to be more draining than not.
mm,
I think because it's like they're because a lot of them are superficial, and the superficial ones are really tiring. And then it's a different kind of work to be with somebody where I'm in the caretaking role. Um,
mhm,
so finding someone who we can both kind of gently mutually enter into this more vulnerable state, that's a really recharging thing and a really wonderful thing. But it's increasingly rare. So, um, but yeah, uh, managing the fatigue and the energy, it's a
yeah,
tricky. I think the thing I have to remember is that there's not ever going to be a completely fixed. This is the way to do it, just because the life around me isn't fixed. So I have to also be kind of flexible with how I approach it, and that
mhm.
is its own challenge sometimes. So anyway, um, okay, letter 31, the way we win. Um, the way we win matters. Name that movie. So
Remember the Titans? I honestly don't know.
it's okay. As a Ender's Game, the movie version. That
Oh, yeah.
yeah. Although remember the Titans, that was a good one. I'm gonna have to revisit that
The
one.
the only thing I remember about that is that Donald Faison is in it, because that came up in some trivia, and I was listening through the Scrubs podcast a little bit, and then he had mentioned that he was in Remember the Titans. I was like, "Wait, what?" And that was the one trivia question that I got that night, but because of the way the trivia game was being run, we'd answered the question before correctly, and so we weren't allowed to answer that question, and I didn't remember that rule, and I answered. I was so mad. I was so
Ah,
mad.
yeah.
It's the one sports movie that I kind of know anything about.
Oh, your one chance for a sports reference gone.
Yeah.
Oh, sad. Okay. Okay. Well, anyway, so here in letter 31. This is the last letter, and uh, apparently, if we follow it, so the patient died in the course of the
Mhm.
war, uh, bombing or something, and Screwtape is furious, and he's complaining to Wormwood, you've let us all slip through your fingers. I mean, interjecting the tone. Um, but yeah, it seems like so maybe let me know how you're reading this. It's seeming
Mhm.
to me like Screwtape's looking at this as a loss. Like the guy died in a state of solid spiritual health, spiritual communion, and so um and so made it into the kingdom. ascended the ladder of divine ascent and is not becoming food for the demons. Is that kind of how you're reading it too?
Yes, yeah, and it seems like very, very unexpectedly, like bomb dropped on him is like it's left to the reader to kind of guess that for sure. But yeah, it's very much like um, you know, they lost this particular one.
Yeah. They did, and he's very angry about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I think the imagery and kind of talk through the mostly the latter half of the chapter around like what happened when the patient died. I think there he's furious. I see in this passage around like he not only saw them, capital T, meaning some sorts of spiritual beings, like again, like this is very much left to the reader, but he saw the patient saw him, this animal, this thing begotten in a bed could look on him. What is blinding, suffocating fire to you is now cool light to him, clarity itself, and wears the face of a man. um and like there's this again, this like in kind of rage that Wormwood or Screwtape has um around like what these nasty animals, humans are able to do where they can't.
Mm. I'm really glad you brought up that quote. That was the same quote I was highlighting in this chapter too, which yeah, it captures the idea of kind of the mystery of the Gospels, and even in some of the New Testament writers, they talk explicitly about how like the angels are marveling, and they're like, what happened? Like these human creatures that are they're part material, part spirit, and now they've become like higher than the angels, and like what, like God became like them and took on their flesh, like what? It's just this baffling thing, and yeah, I love how, I mean, we're seeing it from the demon's perspective, and so it's a point of rage and defeat. But he's basically saying, yeah, and this scummy creature has now become radiant and divine, and is now standing delighted in the presence of God, and this thing that we can't even do. Like we've lost access to God, we've lost access to heaven, we've lost access to the light and all things good and pure and holy, and these things. And what did he have? Screwtape has a very strong language for describing people earlier. He doesn't really like us, but he's just like, oh yeah, and he's in heaven. What was the other quote? He says, he said, Wormwood, did you mark how naturally, as if he'd been born for it, the earth-born vermin entered the new life? How all his doubts became, in the twinkling of an eye, ridiculous. I know what the creature was saying to itself. Yes, of course, it was always like this. All horrors have followed the same course, getting worse and worse, and forcing you into a kind of bottleneck, till at the very moment when you thought you must be crushed, behold, you were out of the narrows, and all was suddenly well. The extraction hurt more and more, and then the tooth was out. The dream became a nightmare, and then you woke. You die, and then you are beyond death. How could I have ever doubted it? But there's this idea of like this was the trajectory all along, or this is what the person was made for all along, that I think really stands out to me. It reminds me a little bit. It reminds me a lot of the Great Divorce, where there's a. I brought my tattered book because there's this other quote early on in the Great Divorce where what does C.S. Lewis says? He says, but what you ask of Earth? Earth, I think, will not be found by anyone to be in the end a very distinct place. I think Earth, if chosen instead of heaven, will turn out to have been, all along, only a region in hell. And Earth, if put second to heaven, to have been from the beginning a part of heaven itself. And there's this idea of like trajectory and like timelessness, and like for the person who is on a trajectory toward heaven and toward that sort of salvation, like like every moment is already part of that. And for people who are going the other way, like I mean, every moment is already hell. Like you're already in hell even here on earth, that sort of thing. Which yeah, which it seems like a really strong like identity statement. But anyway, What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, it's definitely like an imagining, I guess, because there's just a lot that we can't and don't know. It seems really nice in a
Right.
lot of ways. I think, there's also, and we've touched a little bit about this on the Great Divorce as well. Actually, that's a large portion of the book, depending on how you're interpreting it. Was this little quote? Where did you go? Pains he may still have to encounter, but they embrace those pains. They would not barter them for any earthly pleasure. All the delights of sense or heart or intellect with which you could have tempted him, even the delights of virtue itself, now seem to him in comparison, but as half nauseous attractions and of a rattled harlot, which would seem to a man whose heart, it goes on, and like that the way that it's kind of described, and the way that death, I guess, is kind of described in this book, as opposed to the Great Divorce and like the short little bits that overlap of the here thereafter, um, are a little different, but at the same time, like, it's this, this idea that like growth doesn't stop, with the mortal life, I guess, which I find definitely certainly interesting and hopeful.
Yeah, there's you get a lot of this in Orthodox thought that death very much is not just an ending. It's a transition, and
Hmm.
I mean, part of how we understand the resurrection is informs a lot of why we venerate our saints and why we interact with the saints still, and we pray with them. We ask their prayers because we we see them as like still active members of the church. They're just invisible to our eye, and so yeah, we'd like be like, yes, Saint Pantaleon, please pray for me, because you're still alive and you're closer to God than I am. So, and I'm, of course, I still need to pray myself, but hey, why not have more people praying for me that kind of know what they're doing? So yes. Yeah, well done to the patient for sticking it out. And I hope his girlfriend's okay too. But anyway, yeah. Well, let's see. Do you have a couple of minutes?
Sure, I could
Okay.
talk a little bit over the epilogue.
Yeah, the epilogue. So, it's a little bit. I don't know. I felt like this was where he gets a little bit weird, but
Yeah.
that's okay.
And dense again, like,
Yeah,
Lewis's writings, and I think we've talked about this. I think we talked about this more in the Great Divorce. Like, some of his writings for me are very easy to consume, and other ones are just like, it's kind of like slogging through. And so this
yeah.
this one was a little bit of that. I was also reading it very late at night, which did not help.
That's fair. Yeah, I think there's one of the letters where my notes for were basically like, my brain is tired on this one.
Yeah.
That was all I wrote. So the idea, the setting is so it's imaginative, speculative, because we don't actually know what the uh, demons do with each other. But Screwtape is giving a commencement speech or something at the school of the training college for young devils, and uh, early on, one of the points he's making, he's talking about the food, and I guess they're like, feasting on corrupted souls, and he's like basically saying this food's terrible because it's like bland and just like not flavorful and like kind of disgusting. And so he's like criticizing them there because these people were not that evil. But then he's also like, but there's a lot of them, and there's an
Mhm.
abundance of it, and so kind of the takeaway I'm taking from there is that it's like it's not necessarily the goal of the demons to make us become like these evil, vile monsters. Like, we don't have to be like the most evil person. We just have to be like a little bit evil, or just like,
Mhm.
just like sufficiently not good. Um, like, yeah, like um, they don't need to. Yeah, you don't need to like blow the whole boat up. You just need to like blow a small hole in the hole, and then it
Mhm.
sinks. That sort of thing. So there's some mention of like the lukewarmness of people that kind of does the trick. And so
Mhm.
Screwtape's like, yeah, and these people, they're not really that vile, so they're not really that tasty, but hey, we got a lot of them, so that's good, and like keep up that work or something. It's kind of what I get from like the first portion of this.
Yeah, yeah, and that's definitely a theme kind of there throughout, even towards the end. Like he's talking about, if you actually just get your hands onto a celebrity or something like that, then like what masses will be drawn to us and they'll do our work for us, that sort of thing. But again,
Yeah.
like it's like this idea of quantity over quality in a lot of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, yeah. Where it seems like as Lewis is understanding God, he's like wanting both quantity and quality. Like, he's not just wanting people to like kind of squeak by into heaven, although like he'll accept that, but it's like he's wanting people to become, the fullness of who they are, which is to be very
Hmm.
much like God and to embody all of the virtues. So um that's a very, very different thing. Um and then yes, it's a very, very heady thing. But then he gets into there. He's talking about tools that he recommends, and so he brings up democracy. He
Hmm.
says, democracy is the word with which you must lead them by the nose, and uh, connecting. I think he's highlighting in democracy the idea of having people all believe that they're equal. And he says that's supposed to prompt a man to always say, I'm as good as you. So he's, I think he's highlighting this great like equalizing effect, and saying here's some ways that becomes a really bad thing. But here's where, so I'm not like really philosophical, really political, and so here's where I'd be like a little bit more curious your thoughts on like democracy versus like, I know, socialism, capitalism. I know we don't have the scotch, but you know, what?
Yeah, I think I actually paralleled a lot of this. I don't know. I guess there's two fronts. I'll talk about the first one first. I paralleled a lot of this with like when we were reading through 1984. So Orwell was absolutely a socialist, continued up until death. But yet 1984, on the very front of it, looks like a treatise against socialism, where in fact it's actually more of a treatise against authoritarianism. And Orwell was kind of showing that authoritarianism grows in all fields, not just in particular ones. Um, there's a lot more to dig into that side of things, but I think like I kind of view like this use of democracy in kind of the same way, and again at the same time a little bit more paralleling Orwell again. Like it's the idea of democracy that they're looking for and that they're using to abuse instead of like the actual acts of democracy. Um, like it was that very much like that equalizing, but coming from like, oh, well, I'm just as good as you, not necessarily that humble sort of like realization that all people are as good as me, um, or as worthful as me, kind of however you want to phrase that. And so I think that's definitely where I was taking a lot of this, because it's like the ideas are good and make us feel good, but then we can also easily so twist them into really bad things. We see that in many things. We see it also within the church. Like there's these ideas of authority that can be very, very deeply twisted, from servant leadership to outright authoritarianism, of ego, of many, many other bad things that we have seen. Um, and I would definitely say that's kind of what's going on here. I definitely disagreed with what I imagine Lewis's sentiments are if we were taking like the antithetical sort of opinion of these demons for sure. Where was I? I did actually, I guess, dropping a little bit further. Um, the interesting sentence, this dangerous phenomenon called Christian socialism was rampant. Factory owners of the good type, which grew rich on sweated labor, instead of being assassinated by their work people, we could have used that, were being frowned upon by their own class. And so like there's this definite like I actually don't know much about Lewis's kind of theories around, I guess, politics is the wrong word, economics, whatever. I mean, that wasn't exactly his realm, so I don't think he did a lot of writing on it. But I think like that sort of was like, I didn't expect that Lewis might be kind of for something like that. And again, like, I don't know, it's not very clear from these letters. But what were the other things? I highlighted them late last night. I was like, wow, this just doesn't sit super well with me. But expresses.
Yeah. I wonder if I wonder if I should not talk in the morning.
Same.
Yeah. Perhaps there's a difference here between like a democratically structured government and some of these like core like philosophical ideas. I don't know. I'm not nearly qualified to be able to say like this sort of government is or isn't good, because like I mean they're all like limited in some severe ways. But it seems like part of what he's emphasizing is like some central ideas of just how people look at each other. Like I know he's talking a lot about like incentives to work or motivation, and like if the prime value is I want to be like everyone else, then he's noticing a tendency for people to like cut themselves off and to not strive for excellence or to not work harder in order to fit in. And or sometimes if they want to, if one stock wants to go above the rest, like the others will cut it down. And I think he's noting that tendency, which that doesn't strike me as strictly like a government thing or a political thing as much as just like a people characteristic thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's again like kind of folding back to how I felt reading through a lot of Orwell, was like, a lot of like the tyranny and the authoritarianism was self-administered by the people. And this idea, like you were talking about, where the wheat was not just being cut down, but it was cutting itself down. Like these stalks were cutting off the high grains, and even the high grains were cutting themselves off to kind of fit in. Yeah, and I think that's also where a little bit of my like rubbing me the wrong way a little bit, kind of in just some of the analogy of like, there's now women these days kind of pray to be just like any other normal 20th century woman. And I guess like that's probably just me reading sexism into kind of the writing, which very well may have been like, this is written in what, like the 50s, and things like that. I think that was a part where it's like, yes, also I think the one piece that I did very much disagree with was this idea that now because of this, and even Screwtape puts democracy in quotes, but like this idea that children who are fit to proceed to a higher class may be artificially kept back because others would receive a trauma by being left behind. And I think that one sat wrong with me, because I've seen that argument used very unfaithfully. That's the wrong word that I'm looking for. Bad faith argument, I guess. Around like, public institutions and education, of like, they're just kind of holding people back. It's like, no, actually they're just trying to bring people forward. That sort of stuff. And so like those are like the little bits that I'm like, oh, this doesn't really sit well with me. But a lot of this too is like going back to those ideas of like, ideas when they are twisted and they feel good are really excellent fodder for manipulation.
Yeah, I think you're right. And yeah, any good idea can be twisted. Any good thing can be corrupted. And I think there is a difference. So once you take here's an idea and here's an application, and let's make that application universal to all people all times. I think that's one of the things that gets us into trouble too. Like this idea of like, well, should this kid be held back in school or not? Like, I mean, I would say ideally that should get to be like a very individualized, very contextualized, decision. But maybe it's these like bigger policies that like cause more problems. But I guess I would agree. Some what seem to be some of the specific political applications, educational applications, just feel like kind of like off, because I know maybe like again, it's like 70 years ago by now, across the ocean. So those specific things aren't going to sit well with us, I think. But again, kind of going for, well, what's the big idea here? This essentially this idea of like, I want to be normal. I want to be like all of the others. I want it to fit in. It does seem to complement some of the things Screwtape is saying to Wormwood the rest of the time. Is he wants his patient to feel at home in the world, and he wants the patient to forget about the bigger things, to forget about what he could achieve. He doesn't want his patient to grow, and he wants this kept stagnation and everything. And so it sounds like he's reaching for whatever tool he can to get that. In this case, he's highlighting democracy, but I don't know. I mean, we could probably like pick on capitalism or some of these other things as like other any political system that makes us forget that it's just a political system and it's not an ultimate truth is probably a damaging thing to us. So, and yeah, any good or decent thing can be done very badly.
Yeah.
So, anyway,
which draws us, I think, to the final point in this particular chapter. Screwtape opens up a bottle of wine. We'll say a bottle of Pharisee, as it turns out, to close out the toast. And so he's like, "Oh, I take back everything that I said about how awful this dinner was, and blah blah blah, because this is the true stuff." And like it kind of closes out with the fine flower of unholiness can grow only in close neighborhood of holy. Nowhere do we tempt so successfully as on the very steps of the altar, which is like, what an epitaph. What a incredibly important critique, not only of the world then, but of the world now. It is the more close that you are to goodness, and we saw this with like the twisting of ideas before. If we are to take democracy as a moral good, I would argue that's a whole other line of philosophy. And so, but then to have it be twisted, like how much, and we've talked about it on this podcast many times, like how much do we see just massive spiritual abuse, and it is so potent because it is so close to what things should be.
Yeah. This idea of like doing their best work on the steps of the church, it's making me think, and this icon has come to mean quite a bit to me, but it's the ladder of divine ascent, and the way it's depicted, it's this ladder, and like the dragon is at the bottom and the Lord Jesus is at the top, and there's people at all of the rungs, and there's angels helping, and there's demons pulling people down, and you see people falling from the ladder, like even up from the very top. And so there's this idea that like the struggle is real, the struggle is active, the struggle is dangerous, like right up until the very end. And we should never take it for granted, and never stop paying attention, because right up into the very end, like the demons are after us, they're trying to tempt us, we could fall, we could misinterpret something. And so yes, the closer we get to holiness, hopefully the more we understand it and the holier we are becoming. But and hopefully too, like the closer we get to holiness, the more we'll be able to perceive like the unholy. But again, it's like, it's that's what we should be expecting. Expect to be sorely tempted every day of your life right up until the end as the normal. So welcome to Christianity. Anyway, on that note, yes, I think we have completed another C.S. Lewis classic. So chalk up another notch. That's good. Thank you, Jake, for taking some time.
Thank you.
And thank you, Stephanie, also for doing this with us. She's going to be back with us sometime for another book. Sometime. We'll surprise you with what that is. But anyway, any final thoughts or final words or invitations to cool shows or...
Oh, cool shows. What I've been watching. Delicious in Dungeon, I think is what it's called on Netflix. Ooh. It's a Netflix anime that's just hilarious. About like, eating monsters from a dungeon because you need to survive, and it turns out they're really tasty. That's been pretty good. What else have I have been watching through West Wing. That finally, I am quite literally 20 some odd years late to the show, but it is really good. Aaron Sorkin, excellently well put together. I actually saw Newsroom before I saw this, which they're not related. It's just the same director, and both of them are incredibly well done. Yeah, I think those are the only major things that I'm watching right now.
Cool. That sounds like fun. I'm reading a book at book 4 of the Wheel of Time, and I finished the DC Titans show a while ago, which was good. Got weird at the end, but it was good. It was a fun romp through superhero-ness. And then I revisited the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies, and that was
Nice.
delightful too. So anyway, well, there we go. Well, thank you to the listener for being with us. And please do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/MosesBernabe. And you can follow me on Instagram at MosesBernabe. You can follow Jake at Jacob Ray Schwartz. And he's a good guy to follow. And we'll be back sometime soon with more stories. Word and Journey is a podcast by Moses Bernabe. If you like what you hear, consider supporting the show with dollars, reviews, or shares, or all of the above. Word and Journey can be found on most major podcast platforms and on my author Patreon at patreon.com/MosesBernabe. Moses Bernabe can be found at mosesbernabe.com. Contact info for my most excellent co-hosts can be found in the liner notes. The podcast logo was designed by TJ Todd, with additional development by Moses Bernabe. The theme music is by Aaron Esparza. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.